All right, committee members, so we have now a number of discussion items, specifically 3. There is going to be a little bit of movement with a few of them because we do have one presentation where the presenters have to get out. That is going to be our presentation on community perspectives on ShotSpotter. We're going to move that up first. And before I introduce the presenters, I do want to give some context as to why we're having this. So many of you all might be following, various media sources and have seen that, various cities like Chicago most recently have moved to end their contracts with ShotSpotter due to concerns around effectiveness and racial biases. And my office has also received, outreach from residents who share similar concerns and just want to know about the overall impacts of ShotSpotter in Minneapolis. I'm grateful that we have a number of local figures who've been actually doing research on this matter and are here today to provide some context and background information with us about ShotSpotter. And we'll continue to have conversations around this in the coming weeks. Also, just want to reaffirm that, one of our responsibilities in AO is overseeing contract administration and also ensuring that taxpayer dollars are being spent efficiently and in alignment with the intentions outlined in the respective contracts. Additionally, we also want to ensure that every service or program is meaningfully, equitably, and effectively contributing to our system of comprehensive public safety. So there's this ongoing national conversation around a tool that has been used to support public safety systems all across the country. And we really want to take the time today to really dig into where does ShotSpotter fit into those goals, at least here in the Minneapolis context. So I'm really excited to hear from our presenters. I will introduce them in the order, and everyone should have a copy of the slideshow in front of you as well. So first, I will introduce Alexander Lindenfeser. Shoot, is it? Lindenfeser.
Close.
Shoot. Okay. Please come up. They are a law intern at the Legal Rights Center and also a student at the University of Minnesota Law School. Please correct me on the pronunciation of your name, and we can kick the presentation off.
Thank you, Chair Wansley, for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. My name is Alexander Lindenfelser. As Chair Wansley said, I am a student at the University of Minnesota Law School and a law clerk at the Legal Rights Center. I am here to ask this committee to reconsider renewing the contract with Sound Thinking, formerly known as ShotSpotter. Renewing the contract with Sound Thinking is not sound policy for Minneapolis. The data shows that ShotSpotter technology disproportionately impacts our Black and Native communities. In Minneapolis, Black and Native residents are 3.3 times more likely to live in areas with ShotSpotter coverage than white residents. The maps displaying the findings of my research are on the slides as well as in the packet before you. To study the area impacted by ShotSpotter in Minneapolis, I compared public coordinate data of 17,095 reported ShotSpotter activations from 2020 to 2023 with census demographic data from 2020. Based on a spatial analysis of this data, I determined the approximate coverage area of ShotSpotter sensors in Minneapolis. The area impacted by ShotSpotter in North Minneapolis is west of I-94 and north of Highway 55. In South Minneapolis, the area impacted by ShotSpotter is south of I-94, east of I-35W, and west of Highway 55, encompassing the Ventura Village, Phillips West, Midtown Phillips, East Phillips, and central neighborhoods. These maps establish a visual association between the communities affected by ShotSpotter and the census block groups with the highest percentages of people identifying as Black or Native American. A 2021 report by the Chicago Office of Inspector General found that ShotSpotter technology affects police perceptions. Innocent bystanders near a ShotSpotter activation may be subject to stop and frisk. When responding to a ShotSpotter activation, police are more likely to believe they are entering a dangerous situation in a dangerous neighborhood. police interactions in responding to a ShotSpotter activation have the potential to escalate in ways that damage community trust. This has lasting and far-reaching consequences in collective memories, harming relations between police and the communities they serve and detrimentally affecting public safety. Minneapolis has contracted with SoundThinking since 2007. Since then, the contract has increased in cost from $325,000 to $2.2 million. ShotSpotter technology encompasses microphone sensors, a secret algorithm, and human moderation. SoundThinking claims ShotSpotter can accurately detect a gunshot in as soon as 60 seconds by analyzing a sound wave. But ShotSpotter is susceptible to two types of mistakes. ShotSpotter sensors underreport because they fail to detect all gunfire. ShotSpotter sensors also overreport by confusing noises such as firecrackers, backfiring cars, construction noises, helicopters, and other loud sounds with gunfire. ShotSpotter does not make neighborhoods safer. A study published in the Journal of Urban Health in 2021 found that ShotSpotter does not have a statistically significant impact on firearm-related homicide or arrest outcomes. Another study published in the Journal of Experimental Criminology in 2020 that analyzed ShotSpotter technology in St. Louis, Missouri, found that ShotSpotter decreased civilian reporting of shots by 30%. The money Minneapolis spends on ShotSpotter could be used to fund effective and restorative public safety programs. The city should invest in programs that build the community trust necessary for prompt and reliable civilian reporting of gunfire incidents. These include support of community organizations and social services, local recruitment and employment, and avenues for promptly and meaningfully addressing and remedying grievances. Cities around the country are reviewing and reconsidering their use of ShotSpotter technology, and it's time Minneapolis does as well. The $2.2 million Minneapolis has spent on ShotSpotter could be used for more effective ways of promoting public safety and building community trust. Thank you for your time. I would be happy to answer any questions you have about my research after you hear from my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Alexander. We do have a number of additional presenters, and I will read their names for the public record. Also, you probably have heard about the organization that they're representing, which is Campaign Zero. The organization also supported Mayor Fry's office last year in reviewing his no-knock warrant policy. So we're really excited to be able to have you all before our committee today and helping us review another critical matter that impacts our residents. That said, I will introduce Abdul Rad, who is the managing director of research and data at Campaign Zero, as well as Faith Bickner, who is an attorney with the Legal Rights Center.
Good afternoon, council people. Thank you, Chair Wansley, for having us here today. My name is Faith Bickner, and I'm a community defense attorney at the Legal Rights Center, which is a nonprofit law firm in South Minneapolis. I'm also formerly a public defender for Hennepin County. So in those roles, I've watched a lot of body cam, probably more footage of the Minneapolis Police Department than I ever really wished to, and time I cannot get back. But in my witnessing of that footage and my experience with thinking deeply about how police respond to our community members, it's my experience that in responding to ShotSpotter notifications, police are being asked to arrive to a scene with the expectation of violence in a way that is deeply problematic given the inconsistency of the technology. Given that 90% of the time, there's no evidence of anyone being harmed or direct gun violence, the fact that police are being dispatched to these sites, guns drawn, ready to engage in violence, leads to more contentious interactions between police and the neighbors who are living in places that are surveilled by this technology. So it's damaging to community trust and further aggravating relationships between people and the police. I we all want both our neighbors and the Minneapolis Police Department.
I'm sorry, just a quick thing. I'm hearing from the public feedback back here, so if we can just make sure folks in the audience, make sure we can hear the speakers and respect them speaking. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Chair Wansley. And I understand that it's contentious because we do want our neighbors to be responded to quickly if they are hurt by gun violence. I myself have lost a family member who was a Native woman to gun violence in South Minneapolis. And the reality is that we do want quick response times, but how we get there is we build public trust so people feel like it's safe for them to call the Minneapolis Police Department, and they feel like if they do dial 911, their friends and relatives and neighbors aren't going to be put in harm's way. And this $2.2 million could be much better spent on rebuilding that community trust in a verifiable, consistent way than in this surveillance technology that the vast majority of the time is just leading to erroneous and deeply escalated police contact that's unnecessary and really harmful. Thank you.
Thank you, Council, for having this presentation and letting us speak about ShotSpotter. Want to take a moment. I know that there's been several devastating incidents of police violence just this past week. I'm taking a moment to recognize those individuals, their families. It's a privilege to be here in Minneapolis and to discuss the issue of ShotSpotter, which we've been doing across the U.S. in several different cities. My name is Abdul Nasser Rad. I'm the Managing Director for Research and Data at Campaign Zero. We're an organization working to advance restorative and effective solutions to safety. I previously worked at the New York City Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, where I led research and data for the Office of Neighborhood Safety, which encompassed the Office of Prevent Gun Violence. And then previously, I was at a nonprofit called the Vere Institute, where I advised law enforcement agencies across the U.S. on comprehensive safety efforts. I've worked with ShotSpotter in the past, both within police departments and within government, and was quite oblivious to really the data and didn't really think twice about what I was looking at until I came to Campaign Zero, where we started this work. And we also want to acknowledge the amazing work done by local organizers here in Minneapolis and other organizations such like the Legal Rights Center, who are advancing restorative and effective solutions to public safety. So to start us off, I'm going to try to take an objective approach on the actual ShotSpotter process, how it functions, talk a little bit about the research, and then go from there. So the research up until really last year was quite mixed. There's been several recent studies in 2023 that has provided a lot of clarity on the research. The National Institute of Justice funded a large evaluation in Chicago, Kansas City, which has provided a lot of clarity around response times, gun violence prevention efforts, and other of the sort. So what we do know is that ShotSpotter has not been found to have an impact on gun violence or gun violence victims. It has not been found to reduce it. There hasn't been a study to date to look at the large scales using quasi-experimental that's been found to save lives, although we do know that it does increase response time, so whether it's a minimal impact or something else, that's unknown. Third, it has not been found to have an impact on case clearance rates. This is more of an issue around evidence collection, forensics, and these other things that go beyond the scope. ShotSpotter has been found to increase 911 response times for calls for service by residents. It has been found to result in over-policing, false arrests, and heightened interactions, and it has been found to disproportionately be deployed in Black and brown communities. So just going to give you all a quick moment. I'm not going to read this all out, really, but you all have the slides, and I'm happy to go into this in detail with some questions around the key points. So again, not only does it expand the footprint of policing, cause harm, increase 911 response times, but the unvalidated technology has not been found to have an impact on case clearance and no impact on reducing gun violence or gun victimization. So where is ShotSpotter? ShotSpotter is across the U.S. It's also international. But Minneapolis wouldn't be the first city to get rid of it. Just this last week, last Monday, Durham, North Carolina, after Duke University completed an evaluation of the pilot, decided the council to not renew ShotSpotter. Obviously, you've also heard Councilperson Wansley talked about Chicago, and we've also worked with Dayton and Ohio in the past on the same issues. I'm not going to go a little bit into where ShotSpotter is in Minneapolis since Alexander just did that. One thing, these are just some things to know. So who owns the data? The city of Minneapolis does not own ShotSpotter data. That is something that they own, and that is something to remember, especially if we're going to be talking about public data and things like that. So how it works, right? ShotSpotter sensors are triggered. It then goes through some algorithms to help distinguish and filter down. Then there's an actual individual who will confirm it's an incident of shots. That then will be sent to, depending on the cities and the municipalities' protocols, to the call center, public safety communications, whatever the case be, and then the dispatch happens. Every city obviously has its own system and how it operationalizes it. So ShotSpotter versus forensic tools. So things we do know is, with forensics tools, we want educational requirements for analyst certification, qualifications, training requirements, proficiency testing, subpoenas and evidence, validation testing. This is not the case for ShotSpotter. Whether this is the reason for why there's no relationship with case clearance, that's a whole other issue. So we're just going to quickly go into the research landscape. This was from Dr. Eric Pisa of Northeastern University, who led the NIJ work, the National Institute of Justice work, is that any arguments that the cancellation of the Chicago ShotSpotter contract occurred within a low research environment are misguided. Regardless of the political motivations, an honest review of the research evidence suggests the decision to cancel ShotSpotter makes sense. And I want to take a moment here. This canceling ShotSpotter is not a no to fighting gun violence. If anything, it is more of a commitment to fighting gun violence, because the research has found there has not been a single piece of research finding that it has reduced gun violence. And that's something to keep in mind throughout this. In terms of what this research actually looks like, one looking at research from 1999 to 2016 found that there's no significant impact on firearm-related homicides or arrest outcomes. And then more recently, the NIJ study, GDT is just gun detection technology, did not influence any of the gun violence categories involving confirmed victims. And one thing that is just in the master service agreements with ShotSpotter is that they don't say like we will promise reductions in gun violence. That's not what they claim. That is something that's sort of been assumed by individuals, but that is something that is a thought. So that's why I'm going through why. ShotSpotter technology has not undergone independent testing and validation. This is an important part. They have never allowed for an independent evaluation, going through their false positives, and this creates a serious issue. Even in their service agreement, they say they can't distinguish between fireworks and gunshots. That's what that little snipping is. In terms of case clearance, a recent study in 2023 found that it did not significantly influence the likelihood of evidence collection. So whether, in the case of Houston, one of the council members, a former Houston police investigator, said shell casings provide no actionable intelligence and are useless in court. He added that officers are picking up trash. Study confirms that ShotSpotter does in fact increase 911 response times for residents who call 911. ShotSpotter implementation causes police officers to be dispatched 1 minute slower, 23% increase, and arrive on scene nearly 2 minutes later. These are just some additional, I won't go through each one, but you can go through the cities and you can see a few additional notes on Houston, Chicago, Kansas City. Research investigations find that ShotSpotter has resulted in unfounded deployments, right? So this is the term of an officer showing up, and there isn't anything there. Harassment, false arrest, and use of force. We know the case of the false arrest in Chicago with Mr. Michael Williams. Spent a year in jail after a ShotSpotter analyst reclassified a notification from a firework to a gunshot. And that was the only piece of evidence. And then, of course, Faith spoke about the issue of unconstitutional stop and frisk. I have no legal expertise. I will not go into that. And then, of course, we went through and talked about just the sort of mirrored images across the country with where ShotSpotter is, with the coded, which we put it where it's historically high crime. So just some case studies. Like I said, Minneapolis wouldn't be the first. it would be the next making an important commitment to actually fighting gun violence. So Durham, North Carolina, just this past Monday, voted to not renew after Duke conducted their evaluation and provided the findings to the council. Chicago, Illinois, won't go too much into it, but that was last month. Again, one of their biggest clients decided not to move forward, and the reasoning was not that the mayor does not want to fight gun violence in Chicago. And just a few years ago, or really 2 years ago, one and a half years ago, working in Dayton, they also decided to not renew ShotSpotter. And these are just some cities that had it and renewed it and failed to renew it. There are cities where it's been proposed, like Atlanta, Seattle, where they've decided not to actually go forth with it. So again, just the key points: ShotSpotter sensors are disproportionately deployed in Black and brown communities. ShotSpotter has no impact on gun violence. We don't have real evidence to show what the impact is on lives saved. Oops, sorry, y'all. ShotSpotter slows 911 response times. ShotSpotter does not improve case clearance. ShotSpotter mistakes loud noises for gunshots, leading to more police encounters with civilians. And so before I close up, I believe that everyone in this room shares the same number one priority, which is that we want to advance safety for all, especially most people impacted most by its absence. And we want to do it in a way where the system is causing as little harm as possible. And I do believe that's the case for even the Minneapolis Police Department. I think that ShotSpotter, though, is always, unfortunately, their number one priority will always be their shareholders, and they will continue to lobby and mislead and increase their stock price. And what they tell law enforcement, what they tell community, is misleading. What we provided is a review of the research showing the impact or the lack of for ShotSpotter. And again, I'll be here willing to take any questions. But again, thank you. We want this to be an opportunity to work together with community, as a fellow community member brought up, to actually focus on solutions that can actually reduce crime in the long term and not just short-term punitive approaches and spending money on a private, unvalidated technology. Thank you so much, Council.
Thank you so much, Abdul, along with the additional presenters who shared today. I did mention earlier, if folks have questions, I will be using our speaker management to keep tabs. Also, yeah. And I see Councilmember Cashman in queue.
Thank you, Chair Wansley, and thank you, Abdul, and the others for presenting today. And I wonder if you mind coming back up and just explaining a little bit more the response times, because I think I got a little confused about what the data was behind whether ShotSpotter does increase or decrease 911 response times.
Yeah. So one of the things that ShotSpotter says is that that ShotSpotter alerts have better response times for shots fired than 911 times, which is accurate. What happens though with the system and the overhaul of the system is that it increases significantly the actual time response for a 911 call. So, for example, a ShotSpotter alert goes off here, police officer will end up coming here quicker versus, let's say, I called 911 maybe a few blocks down for the same thing. So it's the case being that it does increase the overall sort of burden because, and one way to think about it is if we're having all these sort of ShotSpotter alerts going off, where we know in the case of Chicago and these other places, in some cases like 90% unfounded, that is a huge drain on law enforcement resources. So how will they then respond to residents who are calling 911? I don't know if that kind of helps.
Yeah, so it does trigger a faster response to where the sensor went off, but then slows responses to 911 calls from civilians.
Yeah, that's what the research shows. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cashman. Next in queue is Vice Chair Palmisano.
Well, first, just to piggyback off of what my colleague, Councilmember Cashman, was talking about, do we know if officers are deployed from ShotSpotter in our city. I mean, Director Hodney would know, but anecdotally, I don't know that we always do an immediate response to a ShotSpotter call. Do we know if we deploy based only on ShotSpotter? My understanding is that ShotSpotter helps to more accurately locate where a gun went off when we receive other 911 calls that say they heard gunfire in an area. Is that something that you've looked at?
Yeah, so every municipality has their own set of policies, and some of it is private because of confidentiality. So to the chair, to Councilmember Palmisano, that would be something that you would have to inquire with your Public Safety Communications 911 call center around this specificity. There is guidelines that ShotSpotter puts out as recommendations on how it works. So in some cities, it's automatically will be considered a priority 1, and that's what will be dispatched. And that the call for service in a computer-aided dispatch system would look similar. But in terms of Minneapolis, that is not completely publicly available around how that works.
So, Madam Chair, my understanding of ShotSpotter and how it works has been changing over the years. First, I understand it's gotten a lot more technologically advanced in actually being able to detect gunfire versus other kinds of loud noises. There's so many questions. I will bow out for now. I guess to the speaker's first point, Alexander's first point, sadly, gun violence disproportionately impacts our Black and Brown and Native communities. I don't think it's ShotSpotter that's negatively impacting those communities. Are people affected by ShotSpotter, or are they affected by gunshots, which activate ShotSpotter? Is sort of the question I come into this presentation by. I certainly appreciate that ShotSpotter is not perfect, but I think it's a false picture, and we have people. It feels a little weird talking about this when we have people in the room, in the back of the room, that are part of these conversations in Minneapolis with Minneapolis data every day. But I think it paints a false picture that we flood an area with guns drawn. I mean, that might be the original intention of ShotSpotter back when every major city had a full complement of sworn officers to deploy, but I don't think that's the case anymore. And it would be interesting to hear how this technology has maybe enabled us to work smarter with a far reduced set of individuals to deploy. It also would be helpful to see how it interacts with investigations. I've never seen a ShotSpotter technology be used in an investigation, but I've sure seen ShotSpotter technology used to get to a victim of a gunshot wound faster. So I'm sorry, I don't, this feels a lot more like an advocacy presentation and not an unbiased informational presentation that I'm accustomed to receiving at City Council.
Before you respond, let me just provide some clarity on things. Vice Chair, you were at the agenda setting, and I believe I articulated there that I know you are new to probably the reiteration of POGO, but we have had presentations from community members and external experts to shed light and additional information on existing enterprise, matters that impact our residents. So as I highlighted last Wednesday, this is not unprecedented. You can have your interpretation that this is advocacy, but as also I highlighted, these are entities like the Legal Rights Center who do phenomenal work in our communities, along with Campaign Zero, that worked with Mayor Fry directly to review our own no-knock warrant policies that actually, as previous chair of POGO, Councilmember Ellison helped to bring that to light very early in 2022, I believe. So again, not our first time having Campaign Zero come before this iteration of, this committee. But you're more than happy to, reserve your interpretations of what this is about. But thank you all for being here to shed light, per usual, from a, external expertise lens.
Is it okay if I respond, Chair? To the chair, through the chair, Councilmember Palmisano, I appreciate the skepticism. My background, I'm doing my PhD at the University of Oxford. My background is doing social science research. I'm only things we were kind of showing you are vetted research. But I just wanted to kind of just provide a little bit more information because I think you bring a lot of valid points. In terms of the technology improving, we can't actually say that because nobody's gone in to actually independently test it. So it's hard for anybody except themselves say it's gotten better because there hasn't been an independent evaluation of it to benchmark it from another time, right? So that's an important first point. Second, in terms of the gun, in terms of your point around like how it was originally deployed, I'll be honest, I'm ignorant to when it was started and how it was recommended in the mid-90s when it first started in Oakland. But in terms of what's happening with gunshots is that it's creating a significant resource drain, and this is not what we're talking about specifically because we believe in restorative effective solutions, public safety, but let's say I came from a law enforcement perspective, this is creating an unnecessary drain on law enforcement response to where we know descriptively across several cities, 90% of incidents where they're unfounded. And we're talking thousands of alerts. So that's the second point. And finally, on case clearance, and this is actually, before I go into case clearance, because one thing that ShotSpotter will cite when it comes to independent evaluations is this Edgeworth Analytics, this, quote, independent audit of the ShotSpotter system. What we found is that it relies on clients reporting these potential errors to ShotSpotter, right? And so over a 6-month period from January 2021 to June 2021, the Chicago PD reported 0 false positives. Even though we know in cities much smaller, we see hundreds of false positives. So there are significant concerns. Now, finally, and just remember this is a publicly traded company. On case clearance, to your point, I agree. If we want to find better evidence and it's a tool, but what we do see in the research is that it did not even impact the likelihood of case clearance. Council member, through the chair to the council member. So I know those are the 3 points, and they're very valid, and it shows that you're very much committed to advancing public safety in the city. I just want to be very clear that this research is not, these are in journals and peer-reviewed journals. They're National Institute of Justice funded. I understand if it comes off as an advocacy org approach, but like I said, I used to work within and advising law enforcement agencies and also when I was within government. I didn't bat an eyelash at the ShotSpotter data, my own ignorance. After having to actually review all the research, I started to realize it doesn't do anything. But it is a great selling piece, and it really does great on playing off fear and narratives of fear.
Madam Chair.
Yes, and I also want to recognize, too, after your comment, it seems like Alexander also wants to speak.
Sure. So I want to also acknowledge you talk about false positives, and this is not just about getting to victims of gun violence, but let's appreciate who victims actually are in gun violence. When Councilmember Cunningham was part of the council, and a lot of gun violence and activity moved further northwest, I believe, in Ward 4. He lobbied, I believe successfully, at the very end of a budget cycle, Councilmember Ellison was there, to try and get an additional ShotSpotter active in kind of a new geography of his community, because the data that we are able to collect when we track gun violence is really important. If I don't see, I guess, it's hard for me to see a ShotSpotter, something that is detecting gunshots, as being anything but reactive. But if we are being smart and using data, if we know where this activity is, we could use things like GVI better than we have before. It is really important to understand that gun violence is trauma. So when we are seeing a propensity of shots going off in certain communities, this is trauma. We've heard so many people stand up here and talk about the kids that have to live in these communities of trauma, and we have to pick up those casings. So when we go and deploy, maybe it's not police, maybe it's reg services, but they have to get those casings off the streets, because people need casings collected. Shells in an environment are traumatic. I am sort of surprised, and I hope we have an opportunity, Madam Chair, if you would, to invite the people in the very back of the room who I see the longest serving lieutenant that I've ever known, Lieutenant Zimmerman back there, of homicide. I see Inspector Adams, I see our chief, I see others who really could maybe give a Minneapolis sense as to how we are using this technology, because I don't think this technology is used the same way it was in the 90s, and I don't think this technology is being used consistently from Dayton, Ohio to Minneapolis. Thank you.
And then just in response to that, I know Vice Chair Palmisano, last Wednesday, you actually inquired at agenda setting, whether or not we would be putting staff, kind of on guard to respond to whatever came up from the presentation. I know that was a concern of yours, and I affirmed at that moment that this would not be the space where staff will have to come and, present counter or have to defend themselves. So I recall that being a concern of yours. So as of now, I do not think we have to invite staff up at this moment. In regards to that, I'm more than happy to work with you to have them come present at another AO meeting in response to questions that you have or the information that was presented here.
Madam Chair, with all due respect, they also didn't have the presentation available in time during agenda setting last week, so I didn't even see what was being presented or know deeply about the topic being presented. I would think, since the chief and others are here in the back of the room, that they would be offered an opportunity to just react, not to give a full, not to rebut, but just to react and maybe respond to questions that we have about how ShotSpotter might be used a little differently, or what they see the value is of this technology in our home community fully. And I appreciate your idea of if we were to have an actual report, and maybe Director Hodney to help us understand how ShotSpotter gets deployed in our community. That was a complete slide and something that the presenter referred back to. I think it would be really important if we're talking to Minneapolis, and since this is a public meeting with information being shared, that we're being as accurate as possible, and we have these people here that have showed up. I appreciate, and I very much appreciated how you ran agenda setting and in affirming that this would not be a way to put city attorney or MPD staff on the spot.
And that's exactly what I intend to do. And as you somewhat highlighted, I do want to note for the public record that our clerks did work to make sure that all the materials that you sent over were publicly available way prior to today's meeting. So there was access to this information to the public along with the presentation. Thank you all for making sure we received that information. I'm more than happy again to work with you for staff to have their own respective response and submit a RCA to get on the agenda and present said response. But I also want to be cognizant we have 2 additional presentations, and also want to make sure we get through the queue. So with that, I will proceed with the rest of this presentation as we originally planned. And I see Council Member Ellison in queue.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to respect and hold Councilmember Palmisano's skepticism. I think we can hold that as we get any information, whether coming from this Campaign Zero or coming from MPD. And I do think that we should have a follow-up presentation from MPD, from the folks who administer this program, to answer some of the questions that Councilmember Palmisano put forward. And I appreciate that we have MPD reps in the back who can sit here and listen to this information, take it in. But to the chair's point, I think inviting them up now would be, even if it wasn't the intention, putting folks on the spot and generating a little bit of a debate platform, which I don't think is the intent here. I think a part of what can cause a lot of, anxiety when we're having these conversations is that people do feel like these are the tools we have to combat gun violence, and so the any questioning of the tools gets interpreted as you don't want to combat gun violence, right? And so, and you named that earlier in your presentation. One of the things that I'm curious about are, what are the types of, and you don't have to have the answer, but just I want to know from your, in your opinion, what are some of the other tools that can be that we should be investing in when we're thinking, if we're thinking about this conversation, as places like Chicago has and other municipalities have. One example that comes to mind is that unfortunately we do have high schools and sports teams that leverage this information, right? They got certain protocols around gun violence, and so they use ShotSpotter sort of as a barometer for how to engage some of their protocols, right? If that's not going to be a tool, and I'm completely open to it not being a tool, what are some other ways or some other ideas that we can reassure the public, hey, you're going to have access to information as you're trying to keep students safe, as you're trying to keep student athletes safe? How do we start to there's the critique of the tool, which I think is 100% valid and we should be doing at all times, and then there's but what do we replace it with, part of the conversation, which I think sometimes doesn't always occur, which generates that anxiety.
Yeah, and if I could just, I'll provide some alternatives, and then also the first, and just the word tool seems like it's something useful, and I think it's interesting because I also used it as that way before, not today, but we still don't know how it distinguishes between things, right? So if you bought a stud finder and you still don't know if this company actually has an accurate way to see if the stud finder can detect a stud, which I think you should, as a city, be guaranteed to know what it can and what it can't, right? So I just want to start there. Because I believe, I worked with police chiefs across the country. I believe that they want to fight gun violence, and I know that there are some police chiefs who know it doesn't work, and some of them where ShotSpotter has convinced them it does. But their ShotSpotter's job is to be a salesperson. It's not, and to make themselves richer. So in terms of other alternatives, the big thing is that if in terms of ShotSpotter, I'm going to talk about alternatives there, and then what the actual long-term solutions are, right? We know, everybody knows the long-term solutions are to mitigate financial stress, to invest in civic goods. Those are the things that will long-term. On the front end, there needs to be improvements on the 911 call system. That is something clear. And there's models around in Tucson, for example, where they've merged their public safety communications. They've taken different steps in terms of improving citizen reporting. And so there are other steps to improve alternatives to, or just strengthening reporting. So that's the first thing. The other thing is in terms of hospital-based intervention programs. How are those being utilized to, I think Councilmember Paul, I don't want to mispronounce, Palmisano, brought up a great point around, this could be data that's used by GVIs, right, by cure violence providers, by violence interrupters. If we're going to be doing that, we want to make sure that the data they're getting is actually valid. But if they actually had hospital intervention-based data, they would have a very different, actually more accurate ground truth of what's going on. And so there are other alternatives that I'm happy, Councilmember Ellison, to through the chair, to spend time, whether it be after this meeting or another time, to talk about the different approaches. And what another thing I appreciate about Councilmember Palmisano is every city is different. There's no violence, and the root of it in every city does in terms of vary a little bit in terms of what it looks like. So I also don't want to poorly advise certain things, but there are things around 911 public safety communications that are innovating across the U.S., and it's not involving a publicly traded company.
Thank you. And now I'll just sort of add, I'd be interested to know, not from, we can do this research on our own, but I'd be interested to know what other cities are doing with their savings, right? At some point, this is a budget conversation. It's a public safety conversation, but it's also a budget conversation. And so having a sense of what other cities are doing with their savings could give us a sense of okay, what are other cities doing to address gun violence if it's not this tool? And I just want to remind folks that this is not a new debate even in the Twin Cities. I know that there's been, even in St. Paul, there's been a lot of skepticism around the usefulness of this tool. The mayor of St. Paul has called this tool into question a number of times in some of their council meetings. And so I'm grateful for the information and thankful to the chair for bringing this forward, and excited for us to have this conversation and to vet this information and hopefully get more clarity about how we can keep folks safe.
And through the chair to Councilmember Ellison, in terms of cost savings, we know that ShotSpotter is around $60,000 to $80,000. It varies even more sometimes per square mile, whereas 911 is roughly around $4,000, $5,000. Obviously, we're looking at averages, right? But in terms of thinking of cost savings, that's just looking at it. There is a lot of room, and I agree, Councilmember Ellison. I'm hoping today is a time where we come together, community, where I hope the Minneapolis police also are able to review the research and also have a conversation, because this is not about us versus that. It's about fighting gun violence, and we're here just to say that this doesn't work.
Also, I know, Alexander, you've been standing there for quite some time. You wanted to offer a response?
Certainly. Through Chair Wansley to Councilmember Palmisano's question, the Minneapolis Police Department has been wonderfully transparent with their data. We now have the data that we need to have an informed conversation evaluating the potential benefits or downsides of ShotSpotter in combating gun violence. For instance, some of the data we have is the disposition codes of Minneapolis police when they respond to ShotSpotter activations. By researching more into what information police officers had when they responded and the actions that they took based on that information, we can assess how ShotSpotter contributed to these investigations. Additionally, we need more research in order to evaluate ShotSpotter's impact on gun violence in Minneapolis. ShotSpotter claims that its technology is necessary to combat underreporting through 911 calls of shots fired. Now, 911 calls are incredibly useful for dispatching police to do investigations, but also EMS to help victims. We need to be bolstering our infrastructure for prompt, reliable, and informative 911 calls so that gun violence can be reduced in this city and victims can get the help that they need promptly.
Thank you so much, Alexander. I did put myself in queue before the exchange a little bit, but I just wanted to also reiterate gratitude for our speakers to come in and give context on this matter. I know last term a number of council members, including myself, actually did a tour of 911, which we were all encouraged to do. And I remember a significant portion of that tour, we just listened to just shots from ShotSpotter. And there were, definitely conversations even then about the accuracies where we don't know if that's a firecracker or not. And it was a really helpful conversation around how is this tool being utilized primarily within 911. We did not get a chance to dig into how this is being factored into investigations, follow-up around clearance rates and things of that nature, and I look forward to that being a follow-up conversation as we dig into the more localized data and impacts, and we'll be in touch, Alexander, around your findings regarding that. But I just want to name that ShotSpotter has been even framed to council a very instrumental component of our dispatch system and safety response system. And in regards to the GVI comment around how ShotSpotter can be used to mitigate gun violence intervention in very specific areas across our city, I want to flag that we're actually having a presentation from our neighborhood safety department this Wednesday in the Public Health and Safety Committee around exactly that. What is our GVI methods, an update on that work, how are we being intentional around our practices and ensuring that we're doing gun violence interventions in the communities that are most in need. So I'm really looking forward to receiving more information about that from the Director of Neighborhood Safety Department. I encourage my colleagues to also tune into that presentation as well as the public, and hopefully that will give us some more context. And you also mentioned, Abdul, the hospital-based program. We also supposed to have that as a component of our existing services under Neighborhood Safety Department. So it'll be actually good to know where do we stand in regards to that program. We're actually one of the few cities in the country under our Cure Violence model that had the big three of a hospital program, the GVI, violence interrupters. So technically we're supposed to have all of these systems in existence, and it'll be good to know a status report on where we're at and how is that helping us actually reach historic levels of decreases in violent crime across the city, including homicide. So I'm really excited to hear that presentation. That's not happening far away. That's literally happening on Wednesday. And I'm really excited to hear from staff there. So I just wanted to provide some of that feedback of like, we actually have some follow-up on the points that you raised in the next 48 hours. But with that, I do know we have a number of additional presentations, so I will take one last glance at the queue. Vice Chair Palmisano, was that something, were you back in queue? Okay, Vice Chair Palmisano.
Thank you. First, I wanted to comment briefly on the idea of a stud finder. I myself have an absolutely worthless stud finder at home that makes it impossible to hang up anything that should be weight-bearing. But I'm not sure I would make that metaphor to the technology of ShotSpotter. I'm afraid that if we aren't tracking shots fired, we can only track people shot in our community. And I think we could get a lot more useful information. You know, one thing that I think ShotSpotter is used for is to be able to accurately pinpoint the time that a gun went off in a community and not have to watch several hours of, say, surveillance footage through different cameras, but be able to watch 10 minutes worth of footage. And that certainly would save time on the investigations ends of different crimes. I think this presentation is an interesting look. I think we should relook at tools that we use, and we have over time. And my mind has changed on different tools that we use and different methods of policing over time, and we need to evolve that way. But I also think this presentation causes a great deal of anxiety in our city, and I would like to invite up a representative from MPD, I don't know which one, to simply give a sense of the context here and maybe what they would like to come prepared for to present. I have zero questions for them, but I'm curious what they think about this. I, like everybody here, I think, is committed to getting gun violence out of every single neighborhood across our city. But I do hope that you aren't shutting down city leadership that showed up here today to watch this presentation firsthand and might want to stand and opine on this briefly, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Palmisano. I will reiterate that we will not have a back and forth between community leaders and staff. I absolutely welcome, and I believe maybe you were the member of this committee to invite our staff, because I do want to highlight, we talked about community perspectives, and want to keep that as the focus of today's presentation. Being that you've been longer here than me, you know you have the opportunity to do a legislative directive, considering you don't have any questions right now to ask of staff. So maybe that's another opportunity to get questions, you know, responded to. And then again, more than happy to work with MPD, or it sounds like even 911, to come and have a presentation here in AO where you can offer your own overview of the impacts of ShotSpotter. But for today, we're going to keep it on community perspectives, and that is it. No, I'm sorry, community members, this is not a public hearing. This is not public comment. Al Flowers, Al, please do not do this right now. And I will ask, this is not a public hearing, Al. This is not a public hearing, Al. And can you please, you are very aware of this, Al. Al, I'm going to ask, please, if you cannot respect the business of this committee, you are going to have to leave, Al. You're going to have to leave, Al. You're going to have to leave. Are you? No. If you want to speak, you'll have to speak in the hallway. You're going to have to leave, Al. No, you have to leave, Al. No, please. No. No. No, you need to leave, Al. You need to leave, Al. You need to leave. We need to finish the business of our committee, and you need to leave, Al. You need to leave.
I will leave. You ain't got to know.
You are not leaving. This is not a public hearing. This is not public comment, Al. Can you please leave?
It's against my people.
Can you please leave?
Councilmember Palmisano said.
I'm going to call a recess so that we can reset for 5 minutes, and then we will have folks come back at 2:37. Thank you.